Have you ever felt alone, like the world was watching, but you were locked in a corner wondering where God is? Sometimes that loneliness can feel unbearable, but what if I told you that within that silence, there's a divine preparation underway? The isolation many of us feel is often God's hand molding those He has chosen for great purposes. Just as a potter works the clay, God uses these periods of solitude to shape us, to encourage us to seek a deeper connection with Him. In the examples of Moses, David, and many others, we notice that before their great missions, they faced times of retreat and introspection. These periods weren't punishments, but platforms of growth and transformation where they could meet God in a personal and intimate way. In this video, we'll explore this journey together, revealing how this experience of isolation is in fact an essential step in God's plan for each of us. If your heart resonates with this quest for understanding and purpose, subscribe now and hear truths that can change not only your understanding, but your entire faith journey. Often, when we talk about God's calling in our lives, we forget a fundamental element, the concept of spiritual isolation. A journey with God is, by definition, a mindful and careful walk, and in many cases, this walk requires a temporary retreat from the world around us. This pause often proves crucial for the preparation of God's chosen ones. Before being used for great purposes, many experience periods of solitude which, though challenging, are essential. It is during these moments that their souls and hearts are shaped, their weaknesses are confronted, and true purpose can be glimpsed. Isolation should not be viewed as divine punishment, but as a sacred space of molding. In this emptiness, we are called to deepen our faith, to seek a deeper understanding of divine purpose, and to learn to trust in God's plan, even when the road ahead seems dark and full of obstacles. Modern life, with its incessant distractions and noise, often distances us from what truly matters. Hearing the gentle voice of God who whispers truths and promises that are easily overshadowed by the fast pace of daily life. Spiritual isolation, therefore, forces us to stop and listen, to turn our attention to the one who created and called us. Let's now reflect on how this connects with the lives of some biblical figures like Moses and David. Both experienced crucial moments of isolation that prepared them for the missions and struggles to come. If you remember the time Moses spent in the desert, it was 40 years away from the people he would liberate. It's an extensive time marked by loneliness and wilderness, but it is in the silence of this arid journey that Moses encountered God at the burning bush. This encounter was not only an extraordinary manifestation of God, but the revelation of a new destiny. The desert was the location of profound preparations, where Moses learned about leadership, patience, and above all, about the overwhelming power of God's presence. Each day in the desert shaped his vision, dispelled his self-reliance, and prepared him to lead a people seeking freedom. If we look at David, we also see a trajectory marked by isolation. In his flight from Saul, he spent years isolated in the mountains, wandering as a fugitive, facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. However, this time was also productive. During this period of solitude, David wrote many psalms expressing his struggles, his longings, his doubts, and of course, the certainty of God's constant presence in his life. Each note of sadness in his lyrics carried a song of hope and renewal. Thus, this isolation not only built David's character, but also molded his heart to reign, transforming a simple shepherd into a king after God's own heart. Solitude for them was not punishment, but divine preparation. These stories aren't just about physical isolation. They speak of the profound transformation that occurs when we choose to be alone with God. This process leads us to ask, why does God isolate us? What are we doing during this time? Many of us struggle with these questions, leading us to understand that this isolation is not punishment, but a time of preparation and learning. It's a spiritual laboratory, a space where our weaknesses can be exposed to the light of truth. When we are alone, it's easier to see our vulnerabilities, face our fears and insecurities. Therefore, this is the time to confront everything that prevents us from moving forward on our spiritual journey. In this silence, dormant hopes can be restored, and we finally begin to glimpse the magnificent purpose God has reserved for us. This understanding is liberating, as it transforms the pain of loneliness into an enriching learning opportunity. It is in moments of quietude that the storms within us begin to calm. When we silence the voices of the world, we can hear the voice of God. Often we are afraid to move away from what is familiar and safe, but it is in this space where, paradoxically, we find the most precious opportunities for growth. Real transformation does not happen in crowds, but in silence and solitude. It is in this molding process that spiritual swords are sharpened in the light of divine presence. When you are thinking about this time of isolation, remember that it is sacred, a space where God is working on you. He is preparing your heart and mind for the great things to come. It's about surrender. Surrendering to God is an act of trust that requires humility and a willingness to release the ties that bind us to the superficial and the routine. Reflecting on the examples of Moses and David, it's crucial to ask, how does this apply to us today? What does God want to teach each of us in this season of isolation? These questions call us to a deep interpretation, not only of others' experiences, but also of our own lives. We may often feel alone in our struggles, but it's important to remember that isolation is often the prelude to God's great calling. Instead of viewing your own time of isolation as a burden, consider it a divine opportunity, an invitation to a deeper relationship with God. May these moments not become sources of anguish, but wells of renewed hope, as you realize God is working in your life, even when His presence seems distant. He is shaping you, preparing your heart and soul. In the moments ahead, let's explore together not only the difficulties of isolation, but also the abundant fruit it can bear. Each step towards silence can often lead to a step closer to the divine purpose awaiting you, amidst the many blessings that can arise from experiences of solitude. Be attentive to what God wants to speak and how He intends to transform your life. In these unexpected moments of quiet and introspection, let this journey lead us to a place of deep faith and trust, a place where we can truly be used for something greater, where each experience of isolation is not merely a test, but a preparation to impact the world around us. The purpose of isolation is a fundamental reflection we can make when facing moments of solitude on our spiritual journey. Often, when confronted with these periods, we tend to interpret them as punishments or abandonment by God. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. It's essential to realize that isolation is not punishment, but a time of preparation and learning. When we are led to these spaces of quiet and solitude, God is actually preparing us for what He has in store for us. It is in this sacred silence that He molds our lives, refining us as a potter works clay. Isolation thus becomes a true spiritual laboratory, where God teaches us crucial lessons to prepare us for the challenges and responsibilities to come. In this isolated space, we begin to see our weaknesses and imperfections, and this is a vital part of the divine plan. These revelations can be painful, but they are fundamental to our spiritual growth. It's a time when God invites us to confront our limitations and seek a deeper understanding of who we are in His presence. He uses this time of solitude to dismantle the defenses we've built throughout life, those barriers that often prevent us from becoming who we were truly called to be. We all carry internal struggles, and these moments of isolation represent an opportunity to bring to light everything we need to address in our hearts. Furthermore, it's a chance for purification, where pain and struggle become the forge in which our faith is refined. Each moment of feeling abandoned can be viewed as a profound blessing, for through struggle, we are often drawn closer to God's greater purpose for our lives. During these periods of isolation, God teaches and instructs us not only through words, but also through the lessons we find in silence. Learning from silence is an essential aspect of this process. In this quietness, God speaks, and we must be ready to hear His voice. Silence is often the language of God. It is where we become most sensitive to His calling and guidance. When we remove the distractions of daily life, we can clearly discern what God truly wants to convey, and thus enter into a deeper relationship with Him. This silence offers us the opportunity to reflect on our lives and decisions. And more importantly, it allows us to understand what God is doing in our hearts. We become more aware of His instructions and the paths He is illuminating for us. Consider how Jesus often enjoyed silence. He frequently withdrew to the mountains and deserts away from the bustle of the crowds to pray and connect deeply with the Father. In Mark 1:35 we read that, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. This example shows us that the practice of silence and solitude is not only beneficial, but essential for strengthening our faith. Without these moments of isolation, we risk getting lost in the voices of the world and becoming prisoners of the chains of daily frenzy. Silence reveals itself as a divine gift that, when embraced, puts us in a receptive position to learn and grow. In this space of silence, we can also find the clarity and direction we so desperately need. God not only speaks, but also helps us discern his guidance. Sometimes we are so distracted by our daily occupations and worries that we fail to notice his call. But in silence, our vision becomes clearer and our paths more defined. It's as if we're taking a step back to look at the whole picture, perceiving what is truly necessary for our spiritual growth. Therefore, understanding that isolation is an opportunity to learn to hear God's voice has the power to completely change how we face this phase of our lives. Instead of viewing it as punishment, we can transform this experience into an invitation for a new opportunity of transformation. As we reflect on these topics, I invite you to consider, how does this truth apply to your life right now? How do you feel about periods of silence and solitude you've already experienced? You may be experiencing a time of spiritual isolation at this very moment. If so, remember fervently that periods of isolation are often times of great intimacy with the Father, and these experiences are rarely in vain. Each has a purpose we often don't immediately understand. In the next few moments, let's explore how these teachings and experiences guide us to a deeper place of faith and hope. Let's discover together how, in times of isolation and silence, we can not only find comfort and direction, but also the strength needed to fulfill God's purpose and calling for our lives. May we embrace this journey, learning to cherish each moment of solitude as an opportunity to strengthen our relationship with God and become more conformed to his image, prepared for what lies ahead. These moments aren't just about pain and difficulty. They also become the most precious times of transformation. Let's embrace the beauty of isolation as an understanding that God is always at work, even when we're alone, cultivating new harvests that will soon surprise and encourage us on our faith journey. Resistance to spiritual isolation is an experience many of us face at some point on our faith journey. When confronted with periods of loneliness, feelings of insecurity, and in many cases despair, often surface. In this state, we may feel helpless, as if we're losing control of our lives. The truth, however, is that these difficult times are often the moments God chooses to shape and prepare us for his great works. These desert seasons are an invitation to self-awareness and reflection. May I ask you, when was the last time you felt lonely? And what exactly did that bring to the surface in your heart? It's easy to resist this feeling, fight against it, and seek distractions that keep us from this reality. However, in this process of resistance, we end up missing the opportunity to see how God can work in our lives. So, how can we deal with this resistance? The key is to shift our perspective on loneliness. Instead of viewing isolation as something negative, we can understand it as a divine invitation to a deeper relationship with God. It's a time for us to focus on our inner life and allow ourselves to feel his presence fully. This doesn't mean that pain and loneliness aren't real. On the contrary, they can be profoundly real and difficult to bear. But in that pain, we can also find the opportunity for spiritual growth. What are we willing to do to change this narrative? We can start by praying, asking God to help us see the beauty in silence and solitude, to give us the strength needed to flourish even in difficult times. And this is where we enter the role of prayer during isolation. Prayer becomes a vital tool during these periods, connecting us more deeply with God and his purpose. It's one of the few points of contact we can have with the divine during these challenging moments, and surprisingly, can be a source of great comfort. In this space of solitude, we find not only refuge, but also a powerful tool of transformation. The expression of our anxieties, worries, and hopes before God in prayer becomes an act of surrender and trust. When we pray, we're not just talking to God, but we're opening our hearts and making space for His voice to penetrate our uncertainties. Prayer doesn't need to be a monologue, but rather an intimate and honest dialogue with God. Sometimes we may feel our words fail, and all we get is agonizing silence. If that happens, know that this silence is also a form of communication with God. He's not far. He's present, listening to your pain and interceding for you. Remember Romans 8:26, which teaches us that the Spirit helps us in our weakness, interceding for us with inexpressible groanings. In these lonely times, we may feel our prayers aren't eloquent or powerful enough, but God understands our hearts. Perhaps in the midst of silence, He's calling us to a new way of prayer, one where we completely trust Him instead of relying on our words. We all go through times when prayer seems difficult. During these periods of inward dwelling, it's crucial to focus on God's faithfulness, even when our emotions seem to contradict that truth. When you allow yourself to pray, a powerful transformation can occur within your inner being. Prayer helps align our spirit with God's will. It strengthens our faith, allowing God's words of hope, love, and compassion to reach our hearts, especially when we're confronted with life's difficult realities. It is through prayer that we connect to the divine purpose that calls us forth after isolation. Therefore, don't underestimate the power of prayer in times of loneliness and resistance. Instead of fighting against what we can't control, we can open our hearts to God, allowing Him to teach and transform us in this space. As you commit to making this a priority, you may begin to see God's work in your life in unexpected ways, awakening a new sense of purpose and direction. This experience of resistance, when acknowledged and sincerely offered to God in prayer, can become one of the most transformative moments of your life. Not only that, but by allowing God to work through your struggles, you begin to see the potential of your purpose amidst the pain. When you surrender in prayer, weakness becomes strength, and what was fragmented can be restored. Our calling on this journey is not merely to survive these moments, but to flourish within them, allowing God's transformative power to resonate in our hearts and minds. Therefore, we invite you to reflect. If you are in a period of isolation, how can you bring prayer into this experience? Only through communion with God can you overcome resistance and emerge stronger, more confident, and better prepared to fulfill His calling on your life. As we move forward on this journey, remember, every moment of isolation and resistance, when placed in God's hands, can transform into a powerful testimony of faith and growth. Prayer is the lifeline that keeps us steadfast, even when the world around us seems to crumble. Let us embrace this time then as a glorious opportunity for a new beginning. Isolation is more than just an absence of company. It creates a rich context for personal growth. During these periods of solitude, we are called to deep introspection, where we can look inward and discover new aspects of ourselves. The silence, often uncomfortable, becomes a sacred space where God can confront us with truths that, amidst the noise of the world, would be easily ignored. We can ask ourselves, what fears paralyze me? What gifts and talents has God given me that I am neglecting? These questions reveal themselves as gateways to self-knowledge, and when well utilized, can radically transform us. Personal growth during these times of solitude isn't automatic. It requires discipline and intentionality. The internal struggles we face become a school where we learn about our own vulnerabilities and how do we listen to our inner selves in this space. First, we need to be willing to be honest with ourselves. When we allow ourselves to access our frustrations and insecurities, God can work powerfully within us. We are in a process of becoming more like Christ, and this implies a transformation that is sometimes uncomfortable and even painful. But remember, every pruning done by God aims at our growth and development. This period of growth can involve various areas: overcoming past traumas, restoring damaged relationships, and discovering new purposes that God longed for us to orchestrate. Just as a tree trunk must be pruned to allow for healthier growth, we too are shaped and refined in our character and spirituality. Isolation is a fitting time to address these issues, allowing God to do the necessary work in our hearts. When we accept this personal development, we move from states of stagnation to movement, from doubt to a firm commitment to our divine calling. In biblical history, we find powerful examples of growth during isolation. Consider Moses. After years in the desert, he was not only a better prepared leader, but had become a man deeply shaped by God's presence. Solitude and introspection not only honed his leadership skills, but impacted his heart in such a way that he became a true servant of the Lord. This transformation is not unique to Moses. Many other men and women of faith, like David and Paul, experienced periods of isolation that prepared them to impact their generations. Their contribution to God's kingdom was, in a way, filtered through these experiences of personal growth. And when we finally emerge from isolation, and this enriching process of growth, we have the opportunity to experience a renewed communion with God. Those who pass through the fire of isolation often become living witnesses and bearers of hope for others. What happens after the period of isolation? Those who have been molded by God often emerge ready to impact lives. The communion we experience after this period is often characterized by a deeper awareness of who we are and what we can offer to others. When we leave our personal desert, we emerge not only strengthened, but also with a new perspective and an understanding of our calling. We become channels of healing for others, offering compassion and the wisdom gained through our experiences of solitude. This dynamic generates a life cycle that God initiates. He molds us in a painful but necessary process, fills us with His peace and love, and then sends us to fulfill His mission in this chaotic world. Think of Paul, who after his isolation in Arabia returned transformed, ready to preach and teach with a passion that ignited the early church. His experience of solitude prepared him to lead hundreds in faith. The communion after isolation often brings a moment of true commitment to God's calling. It is a rebirth where we are more connected to the truth of who we are in Christ. The process of isolation begins to bear fruit. The vulnerabilities we once feared transform into stories of overcoming that we can share with others. This ability to understand the pain of others allows us to use our experience of isolation as a tool of support and love, allowing God to use us as instruments of His peace and compassion. As we reflect on the significant impact of isolation on our lives, it's crucial to remember that this experience should not merely make us consumers of spirituality, but active collaborators in the kingdom. God's purpose doesn't end with our personal transformation. He desires us to multiply that transformation in our communities and beyond. What has been given to us must flow outward, bringing encouragement, light, and hope to those still navigating their own deserts of loneliness. As you face your own time of isolation, remember it's not a time of abandonment, but a divine opportunity for preparation and growth. This is a sacred moment to be shaped, transformed, and renewed. That season of loneliness, which may seem overwhelming now, will become a powerful testimony to God's growth and purpose in your life. Be open to receiving what God is doing in you, remembering that every experience of isolation can transform into a beautiful story of resilience and inspiration. May you embrace this journey with a heart open in prayer and expectation. The fellowship you'll find after isolation is not just a blessing, but a new responsibility to serve in God's kingdom. Prepare to emerge from this wilderness not as a survivor, but as an equipped warrior clothed in faith, ready to impact lives and bring hope to a world in desperate need. May your journey of isolation become a powerful testimony to God's love and faithfulness, not only in your life, but in the lives of all around you. Isolation, while a time for reflection and growth, can also bring risks and challenges. One of the most insidious dangers is feeling distant from God. When confronted with loneliness, the human tendency is to be consumed by doubt, fear, and distrust. It's easy to think that being isolated means being far from God's presence. We may feel abandoned, as if He is distant, failing to realize that it may be in our most vulnerable moments that He is closest. So, how do we keep the faith burning? During isolation, the key lies in continually connecting with God, even when circumstances seem to push us away. First, we must acknowledge that God's presence doesn't depend on our feelings. Faith often leads us to trust in His word and promises, even when we don't feel His closeness. A powerful verse that can help in this process is Hebrews 13:5, reminding us that God will never leave us nor forsake us. He is always present, even when our perception diminishes. It's also crucial to actively seek moments of prayer and meditation. In times of isolation, prayer becomes even more vital. We may not have words, but an open and sincere heart is enough. We can pray with the honesty of our emotions, expressing how we feel and asking God to help us see beyond the cloud of loneliness. This genuine surrender can open doors to hope. Prayer is not just a solitary activity, but a dialogue allowing us to re-establish and strengthen our relationship with God. In doing so, we find strength through Him, even in the most challenging hours. Another way to keep the faith alive during isolation is to surround ourselves with faith communities, even from a distance. Modern technology offers ways to connect with others, whether through online prayer groups, virtual Bible studies, or simple messages of encouragement. Sharing experiences and hearing testimonies from others can remind us that we are not alone and that many face their own battles. Galatians 6:2 teaches us to carry each other's burdens, and we should do so, even virtually. The love and support of fellow believers can be an anchor on our journey. Lastly, but no less important, it's essential to maintain a positive and hopeful outlook. Isolation can be painful, but it can also be a time of preparation. God may be using this time to shape you for something greater. When we maintain this perspective, that there is a divine purpose in our pain, we begin to find new ways of seeing the situation and growing spiritually through it. Isolation, instead of separating us from God, can actually become a space of consecration, focusing on His power and presence instead of our challenging circumstances. Now, looking at testimonies of transformation, we find a renewing power. Stories of people who went through isolation and found renewed strength in God are incredibly inspiring. Each is a clear example of how God not only delivers us from isolation, but also molds us through it. We hear accounts of individuals who, in moments of loneliness, were led to a new understanding of His divine love. Each testimony is, in fact, a life testimony, showing how God's presence makes all the difference. A notable example is a woman who, during a difficult period of her life, found herself isolated at home due to health issues. Initially feeling lost and purposeless, through prayer and scripture reading, she found a new understanding of her worth and her mission. Over time, she began sharing her testimony on social media, reaching other women facing similar struggles. This journey through the desert of isolation not only transformed her, but also helped transform the lives of others. Her testimony echoes the promise that even in loneliness, God can use us to touch the hearts of many. We have another powerful testimony from a man who, after losing his job, found himself isolated and hopeless. During his solitude, he turned to God for guidance. In the process, he began writing encouraging letters to people in his community who were also struggling. Instead of focusing on his own pain, he found purpose in encouraging others. Over time, his situation improved, but his commitment to serving others never diminished. His letters became a ministry that still touches lives today. These testimonies aren't merely inspiring stories, they affirm a radiant truth. God is always at work in us, even when we're isolated. He transforms us into tools for His work, preparing us to impact those around us. In the face of our struggles, we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking we must fight alone. Instead, we should remember that during isolation, God is shaping within us a new spirit, a new purpose. So as you reflect on your own journey of isolation, I encourage you to keep the faith burning, whether through active prayer, community support, or the unwavering belief that God is working in you. And when the time comes to share your own testimony of transformation, remember that your story can inspire and bring hope to many others, still navigating the storms of loneliness. God is in control, and under His loving guidance we will not only survive but also flourish in any desert we face. As we conclude this video, it's essential that we reflect on the powerful message God has given us through isolation. These periods of solitude aren't mere pauses or punishments, but sacred opportunities for preparation and transformation. Just as Moses and David were shaped in moments of isolation, we too are invited to embrace this path. Loneliness can be challenging, but it's in this silence that we learn profound lessons that shape our character and connect us more intimately with God. Remember that even amidst struggle and helplessness, God's light still shines. Through prayer, personal growth and communion with Him, we are strengthened and renewed. And when we finally emerge from this desert, we come out not just as survivors, but as instruments of His will in the world. May your experience of isolation become an inspiring testimony for those around you. If your struggles resonate in your heart, know that you are not alone. Allow God's love and grace to mold your spirit. May each of us embrace our calling, ready to impact lives and bring hope to the world.